Presently, I am going to talk about the French origin of Pondichéry. Now, Pondichéry is not a very ancient city as people usually tend to think. There is nothing in the literature, in the Tamil literature or Sanskrit literature, or even foreign literature like the Arabic literature, any mention of Pondicherry before the 15th century. So, as far as I could see, an Arab navigator at the turn of the 15th century, whose name is Sulaiman al-Mahri, had mentioned Pondicherry as Pondicherry in his famous navigational work. The British Arabic scholar G.R. Tibbets had equated the Pondicherry of Sulaiman al-Mahri with Pondicherry of the Tamils of the 15th century. That is the first time that you find a reference to Pondicherry as Pondicherry. So you should be knowing that in Arabic, the word B, ba, rather P and pa doesn't exist. Instead of that, they write it as ba. And that is why instead of writing Pondicherry, I think Sulaiman al-Bahri has written it as Pondicherry, which is nothing but Pondicherry. And this is confirmed by the British Arabic scholar G.R. Tibbets. Before 15th century, you can check it in the inscriptions which you find all over Pondicherry in the temples, as well as in some inscriptions outside Pondicherry. There is no reference to Pondicherry town as it is, and there is no reference to Arikamedu, if I am not mistaken about it, I am sure. Now, coming to the history of Pondicherry, you should be knowing as it is I think it has come into existence around the 15th century. After that, you will see that the Europeans started coming to India, to the Indian shores, and the first to reach the Indian shore was the Portuguese. At that time, the Portuguese had come to Pondicherry, and we have clear records of the ruler of this region, which included Pondicherry as well as the adjoining regions of Jinji, which is about 40 kilometers from Pondicherry, was ruled by a certain Muthu Krishnappa Nayak, who was a Telugu vassal of the Vijayanagar kings. So this person has given permission to the Portuguese to open go-downs and trade in Pondicherry at that time. Later, we find other people coming into the picture, like the Danish people. Danish people, when they came to Pondicherry, they had built a house which was called a Danish house. The present site of the Danish house, I think, is the Chamber of Commerce building, which is standing erect today, the French colonial style building that you find in the white town of Pondicherry near the Bharati Park. So after the Danish people, then the Dutch came into Pondicherry, all for trade purposes, with the help, with the consent of the local rulers. The local rulers wanted to trade with foreigners to export their goods, that is mainly textile goods, to the foreign countries, and thereby they invited all the Europeans, especially the Portuguese, Danish and Dutch. Until 1650, you will find the Dutch people were still in Pondicherry. After 1650, the scenario changes and you will find a gap when there was no European trade that was taking place in Pondicherry. And that is where the French come into the picture. The French had earlier attempted in the 16th century to come to India and Pondicherry, but it was a failure, it didn't last long. But in the course of the 17th century, there was a change in the policy in France, which was under King Louis XIV, and his finance minister at that time was Colbert. Vous devez connaître M. Colbert, qui est très connu en France. Si vous avez lu l'histoire de la France, Colbert il est un personnage très, très connu et intéressant. Donc, this Colbert, with the consent of the King Louis XIV, set up the Compagnie des Indes Orientales in 1664. That was founded in order to trade with India. We should consider the words used by the French at that time was Compagnie des Indes Orientales, which meant that India was considered as one unit by even the French at that time. The British had earlier established the English East India Company. It was always India which was considered as one unit by the Europeans even in the 17th century. So after 1664, many people, many French people came into the Indian Ocean, in fact. They had to find a route to India. Already the route has been occupied by the Portuguese, Danes, and the Dutch, and the French had to compete with these European powers in order to reach the Indian shores, and again compete in India against the same European powers in order to assert themselves in the trade front as well as later, much later in the political front. So the competition was not only in India, but it was also between the European powers at that time. So the French were quite late in coming to India, and it was only in 1664 the Compagnie des Indes Orientales a été établie par Colbert. Donc 3 ans après, il y a notre fameux monsieur François Martin s'est embarqué dans un bateau. François Martin was born in a very modest family. He is not an aristocrat or anything like that. He was working as a sales boy in a shop, and some say that he was a tailor by profession. I do not exactly know. The French historian Robert Schall had written extensively about his origins. I do not want to go into his origins very much, but his father's name was Gilles Martin, and he was born in Paris. So François Martin, before he took the ship, became a merchant, sub-merchant of the Compagnie des Indes Orientales, embarked on a ship to India. And first he came to Île Mascarenhs, which is Île de la Réunion. The whole name was Île Mascarenhs. So this, you should know that this Réunion Island was actually founded by a person called Salomon Goubert in 1638. So Salomon Goubert, la famille Goubert est une très grande famille à l'époque. Salomon Goubert avait découvert la Réunion, et on sait qu'en Pondichéry on a un Goubert, Édouard Goubert, que tout le monde connaît. Donc je vais pas, I won't dwell on this too much. So François Martin s'est embarqué dans un bateau pour la Réunion. He went to Réunion Island, which was called Île Mascarenhs. Then he went to Madagascar, which was called Île Dauphine at that time. And from there, he came to India, to Surat, which was one of the biggest ports in the world at that time. At that time, the Mughals were ruling in the northern part of India. The Emperor Aurangzeb was ruling from Delhi, and he was a very powerful emperor with a very large standing army and a considerable navy. So there was no question of any European power to counter Emperor Akbar, Aurangzeb at that time. He ruled for 58 years. The French landed in Surat, which was the biggest port of the Mughal Empire. In 1666, the Mughal Emperor gave permission for the French to start a small factory in Surat to trade, for trade purposes. So François Martin came to Surat first. And from Surat, François Martin, what he did, he traveled to, in the southern part of India at that time, there was various sultanates. And Sultan of Golconda was one of the biggest. It was on the eastern coast of India. The Sultan of Golconda also was a considerable, powerful force in southern India at that time. And his port, Masulipatnam on the eastern coast, was also one of the biggest ports at that time in the world. Because everybody came to trade here, and nobody from here went outside to trade with other countries. Of course, they were trading with Southeast Asia and certain parts of the Middle East, but not beyond that. Now we have new trading partners who are coming from Europe, and these sultans of southern India, as well as the Mughal emperor, wanted them badly in their country in order to export Indian goods to foreign countries. That is how the French came to Surat. But Surat, they were very much limited. You should know that the French East India Company was not a joint stock company like the English East India Company. There were no shareholders. It was a royal company. The king owned it. So whatever the servants of the company did was in the name of the King of France. At that time, the ruler was, of course, Louis XIV. And so 1666, a certain Frenchman called Bébert established himself in Surat, and then François Martin was sent to Masulipatnam on the eastern coast to set up a factory at Masulipatnam. François Martin at that time came with other 3 or 4 Frenchmen and one Armenian called Merkara. They discussed with the Sultan of Golconda to establish a factory at Masulipatnam. François Martin was one of the factors at Masulipatnam, which is on the Andhra coast today. I do not know if you know the geography of India a little bit. The eastern coast, Masulipatnam is north of Madras, somewhere north of Madras. So François Martin came to Masulipatnam, and there he encountered a lot of difficulties with regard to trading with the Sultan of Golconda, because Sultan of Golconda once again was a powerful force to be reckoned with, and the European powers were only a few men, and they could not take on such huge forces like the Mughals and the Sultan of Golconda. But at that time, you know, the French, realizing their naval supremacy of the Europeans at that time, was gaining ground. Danes, Dutch, English has already established themselves in Madras in 1639 itself. And they had even established a fort in Madras, Fort St. George. It exists even today. So the Europeans were gaining in strength in the sea, though the Indians were quite strong on land. But the Europeans were not in a position to take on the land forces at that time. Now, François Martin was already married before he came to India. He was married in Paris, and he had already 3 children before he left for this Indian voyage. So he never met his wife for 22 years. After 22 years, he asked and his wife and children to come to India, and they came. So François Martin lived without his wife for 22 years. And he was traveling between Surat and Masulipatnam. And from Masulipatnam, he was thrown out by the Sultan of Golconda's troops. And somehow he escaped from Masulipatnam and came to Saint Thome, near Madras. By that time, you know, the Louis XIV, the King of France at that time, had sent Admiral Jacob Blanquet de la Haye into the Indian Ocean with his naval forces. And Admiral Blanquet de la Haye conquered Trincomalee in Ceylon, and then he captured San Tome from the Sultan of Golconda. San Tome is near Madras. Today it exists still as San Tome. So what happened is that the Sultan of Golconda turned against the French because of this capturing of San Tome by the Admiral Blanquet de la Haye. There are many internal politics within India at that time. There's Sultan of Bijapur on one side, Sultan of Golconda on the other. In the northern side, there was the Mughal Empire. In the deep south, there were the Nayaks of Madura, and there were other Nayaks in Genji and also in Velu. So there were small kingdoms in the south, but there were bigger kingdoms as you go further north. Now, the French have to deal with all these forces in order to survive in trade in the region, because they wanted textile goods to be exported to France and probably to other places, and therefore they have to deal with it. On top of that, the finances of the company was not very good. The French East India Company's finances was not in a very comfortable position, and they had to borrow excessively from the local merchants in order to trade. It was not a cakewalk for the French or any other European to trade in India. It was quite difficult in the beginning, and they have to struggle. They had to borrow from the local merchants as well as the local rulers in order to trade profitably in the region. And of course, there was a lot of profits to be made in the region, and therefore they persisted, and they finally probably succeeded in the course of time. But we won't go into all those details. We will restrict to our man François Martin, what he did and how did he re-establish Pondichéry as we find it today. Pondichéry as we find it today is almost, I would say that François Martin, when he came to Pondichéry, he had come here with only a few people, 100 Tamils from Madras, and probably a few Europeans, 30 or 40, some say 50. And with those people, he had settled in a strip of land in front of the pier, which is, you know, the pier, Le Café is there. In front of that, a strip of land was given to him by a vassal of the Bijapur Sultan called Sher Khan Lodi. He had given him a strip of land in order to begin trade. Sher Khan Lodi wanted to help the traders, the manufacturers of cotton cloth in his region, and they wanted these cloth to be exported to foreign countries, and therefore he invited the French to settle in Pondicherry. As Masulipatnam was occupied by the Golcondan forces, François Martin went to San Tome, and from San Tome he wanted to come to Pondicherry. But he waited for the right occasion, and before that, before François Martin could come to Pondicherry, Admiral Blanquet de la Haye's assistant, Lieutenant Bélanger de Lespinay, had been dispatched to Pondicherry to set up a loge. Bélanger de Lespinay was not very successful in trade businesses, and therefore he did not have much money either in order to trade profitably. So he came to Pondicherry with a few Frenchmen, and he probably stayed in the Danish house built by the Danes at that time, during the 17th century. So now, during Bélanger de Lespinay's time, not much trade prospered for the French, and therefore Bélanger de Lespinay came on 1673, 4th February. He set foot on Pondicherry, At that time, there was nothing in Pondicherry. There were a few huts, and probably there was one or two temples. Apart from that, there was the Danish house, which was set up by the Danes, where Bélanger de Lespinaye had stayed. Now François Martin was again dispatched to Pondicherry later in 1674. From 1673, 4th February 1673, Bélanger de Lespinaye stayed in Pondicherry till September 1674. But François Martin came to Pondicherry only on 14th January 1674. This 14th January. He came with 100 people, men, women and children, Tamil men, women and children, plus French people and some Portuguese, some Indo-Portuguese also had come with him as interpreters to Pondicherry to start the trading business here. And in the beginning it is said that François Martin on 14th January he disembarked at the pier and he stayed in the Danish house, which is not confirmed by other authorities. Robert Charles says that he stayed in the Danish house, but I tried to find out if he had any other residence. I did not find it. For the other Frenchmen and Indians, Tamils, there were a few cabins built with reed. Straw huts were built on the strip of land that was given by Sher Khan Lodi, which was just in a part of what is today the Bharati Park. À l'époque, on l'appelait Place du Gouvernement. Aujourd'hui, c'est Bharati Park. So, just a strip of land was given to the French at that time by Sher Khan Lodi. And they had to be content with that. The loge, the factory of the French was in a thatched cabin. Thatched cabin means it was just a straw hut. That was the beginning of, humble beginning of the French in Pondicherry, along with the people who had come from Saint Thome with both Indians as well as French people, some Portuguese and some Indo-Portuguese who had come with them at that time, and they all stayed in that strip of land which was given by Sher Khan Lodi to Bélanger de Lespinaye, and of course François Martin inherited it. And now François Martin was in full charge of the settlement from September 1974 because Bélanger de Lespinaye went back to France. So François Martin being in charge of the trading settlement in Pondicherry, he of course did not have money. He had come to Pondicherry with just 60 pagodas at that time. I do not know what is the value of a pagoda. And at that time the currency was louis, some 14, 20 louis, something like that they had. It's all recorded history by various authors and also in the official registers. So at that time they did not have money, but still they started to trade, and they had to borrow money in order to trade in the beginning. But there are other complications that rose at that time, because there was friction between the various forces in southern India, Sultan of Golconda, Sultan of Bijapur, and now the new force from western India, the Marathas, had suddenly erupted into the scene under a very dynamic leader called Shivaji, and he started to invade the whole of South India, and the French have to deal with them also. And François Martin was not for any confrontation with any local power at that time. François Martin was given only a strip of land, and now he got permission from Sher Khan Lodi to build a small hedge, sort of enclosure for that strip of land, which is in Bharati Park today. That enclosure, later he obtained permission to build a sort of fortress, which was called Fort Barlon, which was built later, but François Martin had laid the foundations for that. And along with François Martin, there were 3-4 people who were Frenchmen like Captain Pierre Deltor qui était là avec lui. Il l'assistait beaucoup. François Martin, je vous ai dit qu'il est venu avec quelques Français. Donc, comme il était un peu catholique, he thought that he should bring in the Capuchin missionaries from Madras for the religious needs of the French. So at that time, the British had thrown out the Capuchin missionaries from Madras. So these missionaries had gone to Jinji, and François Martin sent his assistant, Captain Deltor, et un autre Français qui s'appelle Vildor, to bring those two missionaries, Father Ephraim and Father Zenon, to Pondicherry for the religious needs of the French. And when they came, the first small chapel was built in the enclosure, which François Martin had got permission from the local ruler to build that enclosure. So Sher Khan Lodi had given that permission. By that time, Sher Khan Lodi had to contend with the Marathas who had erupted into southern India. Shivaji was operating the great, in India, he is considered as a great warrior. He was operating near Kadalur, 20 kilometers from Pondicherry. He never came to Pondicherry, but François Martin was promised by Shivaji various concessions, like taxing the goods that come into Pondicherry. He gave monopoly of the port of Pondicherry for the French. No business can take place in Pondicherry port without the consent of the French. Such sorts of permission was given by Shivaji to François Martin in exchange of François Martin not supporting any other local power or any other European power. François Martin cleverly struck a deal with Shivaji, and Shivaji, of course, defeated Sher Khan Lodi in a battle. Sher Khan Lodi passed away, and the Marathas took control of Pondicherry, and François Martin was still in his enclosure in Pondicherry, in the Bharati Park, which we find today. At that time, the Shivaji, the Marathas appointed an officer, Maratha officer in Pondicherry, who collected taxes for all the goods that transited through Pondicherry, with, of course, the consent of the French and François Martin. Now the Dutch were not happy with this situation where the French were prospering little by little. So they asked the Sultan of Golconda to turn against the French. The Sultan of Golconda wanted to invade southern part of India, including Pondicherry. And the Dutch were helping the Sultan of Golconda, which the French, of course, did not like. So the Sultan of Golconda finally was subdued by the Mughal emperor from the north, and therefore the Mughal empire extended into southern India. Both the Sultan of Bijapur and the Sultan of Golconda was swallowed by the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb's forces, and Aurangzeb's general Zulfikar Ali entered southern part of India, that is Genji. Genji was under the control of it became under the control of the Marathas. Now it passed into the control of the Mughals, and when the Marathas were ruling from Genji and Pondicherry was under their control, you should see that things were going very bad for the French in Surat. Surat also, the French did not have much money and they had to borrow from the local merchants. And Surat had never prospered at all. It was always remained a small factory. So François Martin was recalled in 1681 to Surat. I do not know the reason for which he was recalled. And when he went to Surat, at that time his wife and children joined him in Surat. So his eldest daughter actually married somebody, un certain Bourreau Delande in Surat. And all of them operated in the various factories that the French had established in India. So 1681, François Martin went back to Surat. So from 1681 to 86, François Martin was not in Pondicherry. This colony, the small strip of land which was given by Sher Khan Lodi, was under the control of Captain Pierre Deltor. So Pierre Deltor was also a very enterprising man. It was under him that the Marathas were wanting money and armaments, and Pierre Deltor struck a bargain with the Marathas, and the Marathas accepted to sell the Pondicherry town that you see today and some adjoining regions to the French for a hefty sum. So Pierre Deltor actually paid money in order to obtain what is Pondicherry town today. Sometime in 1684, I think, I am not very sure of the date. That is how Pondicherry town was acquired by the French along with some adjoining regions. So it was purchased actually by the French because the Marathas and even the Mughals needed money, and Deltor was willing to pay, and finally they got this territory. French Pondicherry is slowly taking shape. So at that time, the 1686, François Martin was reappointed as director of French company in Pondicherry. This time he came back from Surat as director. So he came with his wife and probably his eldest daughter, and two other daughters are there. I do not know what happened to them. But eldest daughter had married to a certain Frenchman, and François Martin came back to Pondicherry in 1686, and he immediately obtained permission from the local ruler at that time to build a considerable fortress around the enclosure. That was the beginning of a small fortress. It was not very big, but still it was a fortress for defensive purposes, because they were trading in goods, and the goods had to be stored, and the godowns had been built there, and all the goods were stored in the godowns. So in order to protect that, they constructed a sort of fortress. So François Martin built this fortress in 1686, and this was disliked by the Dutch, and the Dutch were asking the local authorities to evict the French from Pondicherry. The Dutch actually succeeded in evicting the French in 1693. They bombarded this fortress from the sea, and they captured Pondicherry. The Dutch captured Pondicherry and made François Martin prisoner. François Martin was exiled to Batavia, in Java somewhere. That was an Dutch colony. He and his wife were exiled there for a considerable period of time, from 1793 to at least 1797, when again the Dutch decided to send François Martin to another French colony, Chandernagore, in Bengal, along with his wife. At that time, you should see, I forgot to tell you that in 1690, François Martin had acquired another French settlement in Chandernagore in Bengal from the Nawab of Murshidabad. So that settlement was put in charge of the son-in-law of François Martin, whose name is Bourreau Delande. So Bourdelon and his wife, who is none other than the eldest daughter of François Martin, went to Chandernagore to take charge of the factory there. And the Dutch, when they signed the peace treaty with the French, the Treaty of Ryswick in 1797, I think, they sent François Martin to Chandernagore, and from there, when the Dutch finally restored Pondicherry to the French, François Martin came back to Pondicherry in 1799, and he took charge of Pondicherry again. So this is how the French were struggling in order to find feet in Pondicherry. And of course, during Pierre Delto's time, considerable territory was acquired, and this territory passed on to François Martin in 1799. And very soon, the French realized that there is no point in keeping Surat as the headquarters of the French in India. And they transferred the sovereignty of the French in India to Pondicherry in 1701. And they made François Martin as the first governor of, if you want to call that word, French India. First governor of the French settlements in India. So 1701. François Martin then, now he has attained a certain status. Surat was degraded as a small factory, and Pondicherry became more prominent. And Pondicherry at that time, as I told you, was just the strip of land plus the town acquired by Pierre Deltour, which François Martin inherited, and which was confirmed by later rulers also. During François Martin's time, he wanted to strengthen the defenses of Pondicherry. So he obtained again permission from the local ruler. Every time permission from the local ruler, because nothing can be done without the permission of local rulers in those days. They were quite powerful, and he obtained permission to build a fort, a considerable fort, in what is today the Bharati Park. That was the site of the fort. And he built the fort, and he got the permission, and he built the Fort Saint Louis. And within that fort, there was a chapel called Saint Louis. A chapel was built. It is, I think that chapel was located in the angle. Today, we can say that it is should be situated somewhere at the cross section of Rue Victor Simonel and Rue Saint-Ange, depuis l'église qui est dans la rue des Missions. C'est juste en face la rue Saint-Ange qui croise la rue Victor Simonel, et le croisement c'est le chapelle Saint-Louis. C'est dans le fort Saint-Louis tout ça. Donc c'est François Martin qui a commencé, he had built the fort, and this fort was inaugurated in 1706. So he had personally invested a lot to build this fort, and of course at that time François Martin was becoming very old. He was 73 years old, and his health was failing, and he did not last long. He died on 30th December 1706. So 31st December, the father, Père d'Angoulême, did the funeral ceremonies for him, and François Martin was buried in the same park that you find today in the Chapelle Saint-Louis within the park, which is at the cross section of Victor Simonel and Rue Saint-Ange. François Martin was also buried there. François Martin's wife, Madame Cuperly, also was buried there. But François Martin has laid the foundation for what we see as Pondicherry today. While François Martin was still alive, in 1706, he had acquired from the local rulers. One Dawood Khan was ruling the area at that time, a Mughal representative, and he had given villages like Kalapet, Murungampakam, Karuvadikuppam, Olandai, later Ariyankuppam, and all these villages were added to Pondicherry. All on the payment of hefty sums of money by François Martin to Daoud Khan. Because Daoud Khan was in need of money and he was also in need of armaments. So François Martin had to pay every time hefty sums in order to acquire territory, and that is how the initial formation of Pondicherry was established by François Martin, and this formation has almost persisted to this day, quite strangely, because later some other territories were added in 1749 during duplex period. Villeneuve, Bahur and some other villages were added to Pondicherry, but every time it was either a gift or a purchase. It was never based on the basis of conquest. The French had never conquered any territory in and around Pondicherry. Every time they paid hefty sums and acquired territory. And that was the initial stages. And it was also the case during duplex period. Duplex period, he tried to expand French territories. He did not succeed much because of the competition from the English. And the English were more successful. And therefore, as far as François Martin is concerned, he had never the intention of extending territories through force or violence or any other means other than through purchase, through gift. The strip of land that Sher Khan Lodi gave to him in 1673-74 was a gift. And later all the territories acquired by François Martin were mere purchases. And these purchases still persist today. The same villages, the same thing. And when the English defeated the French in some war in the late 18th century, and when the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1814-15, they gave back to the French the same villages that was acquired by François Martin and later a little bit by duplex. Nothing more, nothing less. This is what is Pondicherry, and the foundation for the present Pondicherry was laid by François Martin and of course to a lesser extent those who were with him, assisting him, right from Bélanger de Lespinay up to Pierre Deltor and others. So with this, I think that I will end my speech, and if you have any questions regarding François Martin or regarding his trade operations, his relationship with the local rulers, or how he went about acquiring all these territories, you can very well ask those questions, and I am willing to answer. Vous pouvez poser des questions soit en français, soit en anglais, soit en tamoul. Je suis prêt à répondre à toutes vos questions et ça me fera plaisir de vous répondre à ces questions. Parce qu'il s'agit de l'histoire de Pondichéry que très peu de gens connaissent. Et voilà, c'est une page de l'histoire très intéressante que j'ai trouvée, qui n'est pas comparable avec d'autres colonies françaises dans le monde. Merci beaucoup.
Intéressante. J'avais une question concernant alors pourquoi François Martin a quitté Sourat et a trouvé que c'était plus intéressant d'être à Pondichéry. Peut-être j'ai pas bien saisi, vous avez expliqué.
Sourat, il est d'abord venu à Sourat en 1667. François Martin est né en 1634. J'ai oublié de vous dire. Donc 1667, le directeur de la loge de Sourat a expédié François Martin pour établir une autre loge à Masulipatam. Et comme le sultan de Masulipatam s'est bagarré avec les Français, le sultan il a envoyé des troupes pour accaparer la loge. Donc les Français ils ont quitté la loge de Masulipatam Il y a un Français qui a été tué à cette époque, il s'appelle Malfos. Mais François Martin s'est échappé dans un bateau avec un autre Français, Goujon, et il a atterri à Saint-Thomé, qui était sous le contrôle des Français à l'époque, je vous ai dit. Amiral Blanquet de la Haye avait capturé, avait conquis Saint-Thomé du sultan de Gorka. Donc, de là que François Martin est passé à Pondichéry le 14 janvier 1674. Hein. Donc voilà, c'est comme ça qu'il est venu à Pondichéry. C'est complètement... tout a été planifié, hein, il n'y a rien au hasard.
Merci beaucoup.
Bonsoir. Monsieur Murray. Thank you so much for your talk. I have Yasin and I've recently moved to Pondicherry, and my question was a bit more about the later stages of French colonialism in India. I want to draw upon the Neniapa affair and also what has been laid out by, I'm sure you would have read Robert Economy's book, The Glorious Failure, as well as Dan Ackman's book on the Neniapa affair, wherein the importance of religious and cultural expansionism as an aspect of the colonial project on the part of the French, vis-a-vis what the British were doing in the rest of India. And up until the Jesuits versus Capuchins clashes about, was it apparently or amply clear that the French had missionary priorities on their mind in the initial decades of their presence in Pondicherry? Because I try to compare it with this established notion of extant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, which is the foundational notion of British colonialism across the world. But do you think that the French priorities were as established by François Martin or successive world generals were somehow primarily economic in nature up until the time they got the draft from Paris and the Neniapa dislodgement happened, and suddenly they were reminded that we had to convert more people rather than just to make money and turn into the box. So if you get my question.
Actually, you want to know whether the French were interested in
more religious
conversions.
From an economic
Of course, the main intention was to trade, but of course there was a religious side to it, and it came into the picture only later, but not at the initial stages. So later we see that there are missionaries. You see, François Martin, I told you, brought in Capuchin missionaries from who had fled Madras only for the religious needs of the French. The Capuchin missionaries had no mission to convert the local populations to Christianity or whatever. But later, in the late 1680s, the Jesuits who were driven away from Siam came and settled in Pondicherry. And when they came and settled, the scenario changes a little bit, and the Jesuits, who were also French, had indulged in conversions, and conversions did take place at that time. François Martin had directly contributed to that conversions. I don't think so, though he might have helped the Jesuits in many ways.
Sorry to add on, because I did realize this personally, that the Jesuits were funding their own activities and programs, and they weren't really dependent on the company, the French East India Company as such. Unlike the British East India Company, which were parallelly bankrolling a lot of the missionary activities. Do you find my opposition to be correct?
I didn't understand your question.
The Jesuits were pretty much functioning, sponsoring their own activities on their own, without financially depending upon the French East India Company. Unlike the British East India Company, which was bankrolling missionary activities quite openly and aggressive. The Jesuits were on their own. They weren't really, missionary activities were not supported as a state, was not really a state-sponsored or state-supported project as far as the French.
There is a state side to it, though to what extent I cannot exactly quantify, but there is a state side to it. Good evening.
In François Martin's time, could you tell me what was mostly traded from Pondicherry, especially traded from Pondicherry?
Mostly cotton goods,
Cotton goods.
textile goods, all sorts of cloth.
Okay. But wasn't Bengal more famous for cloths during that time?
Who?
Bengal, regions of Bengal.
Bengal.
Yeah. Were Bengal more famous for cotton?
Yes, Bengal settlement, Chandranagore, came late, 1690.
Okay.
François Martin was in Pondicherry since 1674. So this became the headquarters of the French. But Chandranagore was just at the outskirts of what became Calcutta. It was not a very big settlement. So naturally the Bengal cotton was not very much sought after by the French, I suppose, when compared to what they did in South India. So this is all after, then you got this power play between the French and the English, and whoever has political power naturally had an advantage in trade. So the British, the English had gained advantage in the course of time. By the end of the 18th century, the French were almost restricted to their settlements, whereas the British had obtained political control by subjugating all the local powers, including the European powers, including the Dutch, Danish. Everybody were restricted to their small territories, including the French. So the British had gained ascendancy politically, and this political ascendancy had naturally contributed to their development, to their prospects in trade. You see, I have written a book called Origin of Arikamedu and Modern Pondicherry. So this book was published some time back, and in this book I have dealt with extensively about Arikamedu and what is Pondicherry. As I have told you just in the beginning of this discourse, Pondicherry was never mentioned anywhere before 15th century. It was Sulaiman al-Mahri, the great Arab explorer, who mentioned it first. And this is confirmed by the British Arabic scholar G.R. Tibbets. Before that, there is no Pondicherry mentioned anywhere. As far as Arikamedu is concerned, it is not mentioned anywhere. You can check the Sangam literature, you can check any medieval literature. There is no mention of Arikamedu in any literature anywhere. All the travelers' accounts, Arikamedu is not mentioned. You can check the temples which are around Pondicherry from Sringeri temple, where you got inscriptions, and you come to Bahor and Tirubhuvanai and all those places, and you check all those inscriptions, there is no reference to Arikamedu. Neither there is reference to Pondicherry. So this equating Arikamedu with Pondicherry was started by British scholars. I don't remember the name. It should be in my book. So that it was started by them, saying that Arikamedu is Pondicherry, and Pondicherry town as such, it never existed before 15th century. Arikamedu, there must have been some trade that was carried on some 2000 years back, some trade with, I don't think it is with Romans, but some trade has been carried on with foreigners. So apart from that, I do not find any reference to say that Arikamedu, which is 4 kilometers from Pondicherry, is part of Pondicherry town. Pondicherry town, as it existed, only came into existence during François Martin's time. And before that, of course, the Danes and all were there, but the actual shape took shape, actual Pondicherry, French Pondicherry took shape only in the 17th century. As far as Arikamedu is concerned, it is 4 kilometers away from Pondicherry, and it is about a few kilometers away from Kadalur. It is just an accident of history that Arikamedu, which is part of Ariyankuppam, was given by Dawood Khan to the French. If Dawood Khan had given Arikamedu to the English, then Arikamedu will be part of British India. So we cannot say that Arikamedu is Pondicherry and all that. It is not possible.
Hello, sir. Sir, so I just had one question. So we have been briefly explaining about the genesis of Pondicherry. I just have a very small question. How did the French, the king sitting at the palace, look about the French India? So as you said that François Matin came to Pondicherry with a very small amount of money. Rather the French, rather the British, they were just pumping a lot of money for the East India Company. So why did the French didn't award too much money or too much strength to the French India?
Why didn't they have money?
Why did the French?
Initially there were shortage of funds for the French East India Company, both in Surat as well as in Masilepatnam as well as in Pondicherry. Initially. But later the finances had come and they were more comfortable, and of course they had lent money to the local rulers and they had paid hefty sums. Without some finance, they cannot pay hefty sums to acquire territories. So Pondicherry was acquired through purchase mostly and through gift. There was no conquest in it. And of course the same territories are maintained till today by hook or crook. It remains Pondicherry.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être pour rebondir sur une des dernières questions, il se trouve que moi j'en ai une dernière, mais c'est peut-être plus pour donner une information. L'adresse de la librairie où peut se procurer tous les livres.
Oui, 5 rue Nehru.
Non, il y en a, c'est pour ça que je ne sais plus, 54 livres.
5, numéro 5, Nehru Street.
Nehru Street, et il y en a des dizaines. Donc,
il y a quelques-uns de mes livres là-bas, et puis il y a d'autres livres en anglais, et puis il y a quelques livres en français aussi, et aussi en tamoul.
Et puis je vais faire un peu de publicité, il y en a quelques-uns à la médiathèque de Lyon. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Moi, j'ai plein de questions, mais moi j'ai la chance de pouvoir poser après. Si le docteur Moret a un peu de temps, pour les plus timides d'entre vous, on peut aussi échanger quelques minutes encore.
Oui.
Peut-être sur un bord de scène. Moi j'ai des questions sur les Hollandais. Mais, je vais réserver ça après. Merci beaucoup pour être venu. Et on peut encore applaudir, je pense, le docteur Moret. Merci beaucoup et je vous revois à l'Alliance mercredi pour un autre événement qui aura lieu ici dans l'auditorium. Merci beaucoup, bonne soirée à tous.